Ashli Montgomery with Quilt to End ALZ, and this is month 3 of our Fleeting Block of the Month program. This month we are making a 12.5-inch unfinished block, and I have to tell you, I was intimidated by this block, as you may know from all of our posts and just playing around on the Quilt to End ALZ website. I am not the designer of our patterns. My niece Clara designed it, and when she handed it off to me, I thought, this is gorgeous, let's do it, but I had not actually made all the blocks. So for whatever reason, March's block was really making me nervous, but I am very excited to tell you that it is not difficult to put together. I kind of think of it as a layering process. We're going to start with the middle and we're going to build out from there, and it's very, very simple. We're going to use quite a few half square triangles. So we put our cutting instructions first this month because I feel like it's easier to go ahead and make those HST units. So out of your fabric A, you're going to have 4 3-inch squares. And if you are not using this guy yet, I really recommend that you go ahead and print this off or create your own. I went through and did just a little 1-inch swatch of our fabric A, which is our pink, B, which is our rust, C is our mint, D is our off-white or cream, and E is our dark teal. And I go back to this. I look at this over and over and over as I'm cutting and as I'm pulling the blocks together. So that has been really helpful. So anyways, we've got 4 3-inch squares in our fabric A. We have 8 3-inch squares in our fabric B, and each of these has a mark along the diagonal. That's what we're going to use to sew our half square triangle units. Also in B, we have 16 2.5-inch squares. And then our third fabric that we're using this month is fabric E. We need a 4.5-inch square. We need 4 3-inch squares, and then we need 8 1.5-inch squares. Again, we're going to trace the diagonal on these little guys right here. So let's get started with our half square triangles. We're making 8 AB half square triangles, and we're making 8 BE. So we're going to take our 3-inch squares. We have 4 in fabric A, 4 in fabric E, and then we have 8 of them in fabric B. And so we're going to go through and we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to sew along the outside, your 1/4-inch seam allowance on the outside of that line. Let me put it over here so you can see exactly what I mean. So we have our fabric A, we're going to put a fabric B square, right sides together, and then we're going to stitch on either side of that pencil line. We're going to do the exact same thing with our fabric E and our fabric B, and we're going to end up with 4 units that are pink and rust and 4 units that are teal and rust. So let me hop over to the machine and do that. All right, I have my chain piecing finished, and I have a long chain of 8 square units. I'm going to go through and trim. I'm going to detach these. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but your thread cutter here on the side or the back of your machine is perfect for separating your chain pieces. You don't have to worry about scissors. It's very quick. You just slide that thread in between each unit over it, and it's done. Oh, I missed one little guy. Let's finish him real quick. So now to separate our half square triangle units, we're going to go through and we're going to cut directly on the diagonal line that we had marked on each one, and then we're going to press them. And normally I press my half square triangle seam allowance over to the darker side, but for this block I found it easier to press the seams open, and for whatever reason, the first time that I made the sample block, everything pressed really well, and I didn't put a lot of thought into it. So when I did it the second time to write our block instructions, I paid really good attention to how I had done that the first time. And we don't always put pressing instructions. We just say a nice little reminder in the instructions, we say to press something open. But in this month's instructions, we went ahead and included the direction that I pressed open, because it really did make a nice flat block. I'll put this under the overhead camera and you can see how well the seams flattened out once we had pressed the block. So you can see in my half square triangle units, I did go ahead and press the seams open. So let's go do that now. When we go to press a unit open that we've just sewn together, I always like to set my heat on the stitched unit before I actually open the seams. And I was taught that just a couple of seconds of heat on the thread helps to set the stitches, and the heat causes the thread to draw up just a little bit, but it kind of locks it down. And so I do that. It also makes the unit, if I hadn't pressed before, after cutting and before sewing, it really helps to smooth things out. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to open this up at the seam. Again, I normally wouldn't take the time to do this, but for this block, I really do like this extra effort. And then very carefully, so I don't burn my fingers, I'm going to press that seam allowance open. And once we have that pressed open, we're going to go over here to our cutting board, and we're going to cut each of these down to 2.5 inches. You shouldn't have much to trim off, starting with a 3-inch square, but you can go ahead and lay the diagonal on your ruler directly on the diagonal seam and just trim off any extra fabric that you have. That way we have re-squared everything before we assemble our block. And there we go. A half square triangle unit, seam allowances pressed open and trimmed down to 2.5 inches. I'm gonna go do the other 7. Now that I have all 8 of my pink and rust half square triangles pressed, seams open, and trimmed to 2.5 inches square, I'm gonna do the same thing with the 8 of my teal and rust. All right, we are done trimming our half square triangles. I'm gonna set the fabric E, or my teal half square triangles, to the side. We'll use those in a minute. Let's go over to the overhead camera and go on to step 2. We are going to create our center block, and it is made up of our 8 half square triangles with our A fabric. That's my pink. I have 4 2.5 inch square corner units out of fabric B, and I have the 1 4.5 inch square out of fabric E. We're going to stitch these together. I'm going to go through and do my half square triangles together first, and then I'm going to make a row for the top, a row for the middle, a row for the bottom. You can put that together however you want. You might also notice that this would make a very easy flying geese unit. You can make those as flying geese. I really like the way it looks, where I've got the solid 4.5 inch square, and then everything else on the block has a seam between it. And I just thought that it was really interesting and looked great that way. Totally up to you, whichever way you want to do it. The instructions are what I'm doing here with the half square triangles. So let's do that next. We're going to put 2 of them together and stitch through this line right here. All right, I've sewn together 2 half square triangles to create my, I guess we could call these cooked geese because they've been chopped up, but it's similar to a flying geese unit. And now I'm going to go through and I'm going to press these seams open. This is going to be nice to help the block be really flat when we are finished with the whole thing, just so it doesn't get too bulky. Before I do that, I'm going to set each seam with a little bit of heat. While I'm pressing these open, I'd like to tell you a little more about Quilt to End ALZ. It was founded in January of 2019, and Quilt and ALZ is a 501c3 nonprofit. So we are a quilt business, just like all of your favorite quilt stores. We just have a little different mission, and we go about it in a unique way. So our mission is to connect quilters with the fight to end Alzheimer's disease. And probably the way that we reach the most amount of quilters is through our guild programs. So I am trained through the Alzheimer's Association to share information about the basics of Alzheimer's disease, the 10 signs to watch for, and how to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease through healthy living. So we have taken those 3 presentations and created a presentation especially for quilters. And I love sharing it with quilt guilds and just connecting people. I don't ever want people to feel like they're alone in their family's battle with Alzheimer's disease. And then we also do programs like this where we're connecting quilters from all over the world. We have people doing the fleeting block of the month from Europe, from Australia, from Canada, from the United States. And that's just the things that I'm actually aware of. I'm sure there are people in other places that I haven't come across yet. So we love that we are connecting quilters and people who can have open conversations about Alzheimer's disease and how families face that tragedy together. And then the other thing that we do is raise funds to help in the fight to end Alzheimer's disease. So when you purchase anything from Quilt to End ALZ, 80% of all of the profit goes directly towards research, education, care and support, and advocacy efforts. And like all quilt owners, we're selling our products, and we're selling them online, we're selling them at quilt guilds, we're selling them at shows. It's just what we do with those profits is a little bit unique and different. All right, so I have my 4 units here sewn together, and now I'm going to put the corner squares on the top and the bottom row, and I'm going to put the center in between the other 2. Now that I've created my top row, my middle row, and my bottom row, I'm going to press the seams, and then we will be ready to put those 3 together to finish step 2, which is the center unit. All right, now that I have those 3 rows stitched together, I'm just pressing to set the stitches and then open them up. They're going to look like this. And the top and the bottom row, I'm pressing out towards the 2.5 inch square, and then the center, I'm going to press towards the 4.5 inch square. That way I have alternating seams when I put these 3 rows together. I haven't done a ton of pinning yet this month, but I'm going to do some at this step, just because I want to make these joints line up really well together. So to do that, I'm going to show you under the camera here. I take my pin about 2 stitches or a 1/4 inch down, and I'm going to press that through from the back, and you'll see it comes up perfectly in that seam joint. And then I'm going to go about 2 stitches or a 1/4 inch down on the side that it's going to sew to, and I'm going to push right through that seam allowance. And then when I bring these 2 together and sandwich them, and you can feel that it's nice and flat, I'm going to fold this pin down and just push it right through the threads or close to it. I'm going to do the same thing in this other side over here, and that's going to give me a really nice joint. Then what I've created is a sewing mark. So I know this pin went into the fabric a 1/4 inch down. That's where I want my needle to pass whenever I come through to sew it. Okay, I did the same thing with both sides. I'll take these pins out, and now I'm going to press this, and I want to press this last seam towards the center square again. And you may find a better way that you like to press this. I just was really pleased with how my seam allowances, the seam allowances really ended up nice and flat when the whole block was done. And sometimes that happens naturally, and sometimes you have to really think through how the different bulk spots are going to come together. So I like to give it a little bit of an idea where I want it to go on the back, just gently nudging the fabric where I want it. And then I'm going to turn it over where it's easier to press on the front of the block and give it a nice pressing there as well. So something that I learned from a good friend. So I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and a quilter who I met here who has an Alzheimer's story as well. She worked with Quilt to End ALZ in 2021, and we created a project together. She donated a pattern called Forget Me Not, and Teresa Marlar is a very accomplished award-winning quilter, and she taught me that whenever you are trying to keep a block really nice and flat, that press every step of the way, and after you press and the fabric is nice and hot, get one of your acrylic rulers and lay it on top of the piece and just let the steam work from both directions, kind of trapped under that acrylic ruler, and it will help to flatten your block really well. So I am going to do that with this really big, huge ruler that I have sitting here while we move on to step 3. Step 3 is to create these fun little corner units. And we're going to do that by taking our 1.5 inch fabric E, and we're going to sew it on opposite corners of 4 of our 2.5 inch fabric B squares. And that's why we traced the diagonal line on the back of the 1.5 inch squares. Now, in our half square triangle units, we stitched 1/4 inch away from the line, but in this step, we're going to stitch directly on the line. So I'm going to square up the edges, and then I'm going to stitch right across that line. Let me show you on the overhead camera one time. I'm going to take my 2.5 inch fabric B, and I'm going to put my 1.5 inch fabric E directly on top of it in one corner, and then I'm going to stitch right along my pencil line. I know it's hard to see with my dark green fabric here, but that's where I'm going to stitch, and then I'm going to set that, I'm going to trim outside of the line, and then when I open that up, it's going to create that, and I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite corner. So let's do these. Chain piecing for the win again. Let me separate these out. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to set them with a little bit of heat, and then we're going to trim them, and then we're going to press them open. I'm going to do one just to show you the steps here, and I'll put it under that overhead camera because I think that helps to really be able to visualize what we're doing. I am a visual learner. I think that especially in quilting, it helps me to be able to see the finished piece, and then I have a pretty good idea of what I'm working towards. Here are our 4 steps for these corner squares. We're going to again sew on the diagonal line, putting a 1.5 inch square on either side of a 2.5 inch square. Then we're going to trim on the outside of our stitch line 1/4 inch. Then we're going to open that up and press it, and then you can, if you need to do any trimming or press it open one more time, we're going to end up with 4 of these special corner units that are going to be the 4 corners of our block. Now that we have these done, we're going to use them to create the tall sides that go on our block. So that is going to be this 2.5 by 12.5 inch strip. So we're going to use 2 of our corner squares, 2 of our solid 2.5 inch corner blocks, squares, and we're going to use 2 of our fabric E half square triangles. We're going to make 1 strip, and then we're going to do the same thing again and make a strip for the other side. So let's lay one of these out. I'm going to start in the center, and I'm going to make my teal V point towards me. on either side of the V, I have one of my solid squares. And then on the outside, the last piece is going to be our little corner units we made. And what I want to show you here is that your corner unit should be parallel. So right here, I've put it the wrong way because my diagonals are not parallel. So make sure that as you lay this out, that you've created this symmetry so that the diagonal on your corner units matches the diagonal on your half square triangles. Then we're going to just stitch each of these seams together. Perfect. These strips are now sewn and I need to press them open. So I'm going to set each seam, and then the way that I'm going to press these is so that they are going towards the center. Let me explain what that means, and then I will show you overhead. All right, those are set. So when I lay this strip on my pressing mat, I'm going to press so that the half square triangle unit is open, and then these two seams are going to point towards the half square triangle unit. So let me start on the end. Again, for some reason, the first time that I made this block, the seams just laid out wonderfully. So well that I thought it was worth sharing which direction I had them going. All right, then I'm going to come to the top and I'm going to sew towards that half square triangle. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. The half square triangle unit is pressed open, and then from the outer edge, these two seams are going to point towards it. So let me put this on the overhead camera so you can see exactly what I mean. And that little trick with the acrylic ruler is really nice here. Okay, so one more time, I have pressed the seam open between the half square triangles, and then the two seams starting from the outer ends, they both pressed towards the center. And what's going to happen when we do that, and when we put these long skinny sides onto our center unit that we're going to build out, then the seams are going to be going just the right way so that they're alternating with that center unit. So let's go press our second side strip. And again, these are going to finish up at 2.5 by 12.5. And they're going to be our very last step. So once we have them pressed, we can set them to the side. We are now on step 5, and in your instructions it says to build out the center unit. So what we need to do is create the top piece and the bottom piece, which is the mimic of our little V here, and it's using our half square triangles. So let's lay this out so that we see exactly what we're doing. And unfortunately, our camera isn't quite tall enough, so I'm going to do them on the sides. Just know that this is the top and this is the bottom. All right, so we need our last 4 solid 2-inch squares. I'm going to go there. And then in between there, we are creating our cooked goose here, right? Instead of flying geese, we have cooked geese. And that's going to stitch together and then sit on the top, and we're going to do the exact same thing on the bottom. And I'm doing that just right. Yes, I did this one wrong. That's where we're... Okay, so we're going to use 2 of our solid squares with 2 of our half square triangles. Again, this is the top, and so our V is matching the V below it, and then we're going to do the same thing on the bottom. And when we stitch those together, we're going to have a top row and a bottom row, and we're going to put those onto our center unit to build that out. So let's start with our half square triangles. Our strips are now pieced together, and I'm going to press them just as we did with the other half square triangles. I'm going to press that unit open after I set my stitches. And just like with the other half square triangle units, I'm going to press the seam open on that one. And then I'm going to press away from the half square triangle this time. On our long skinny sides, we press towards the half square triangle. On our short top and bottom, we're pressing away from the half square triangle. Okay, so this is what it looks like from the front, and this is what it looks like from the back. I've got my seam open in the center and then going towards the outside. Now I'm gonna lay this back out. Remember, this is the top up here, and this is the bottom, and it's going to fit just perfectly on my center square. So I'm going to do my little pinning trick one more time so that each of these joints match up just right. So let me show it to you one more time. We're going to go into the seam allowance about 2 stitches or 1/4 of an inch down, come back up through that stitch. Now on this side, I'm going to put this directly in this point on where this came together, because that's where I want my stitch line to be. And I'm going to push that through to that side, and now it's in the seam line on this. So I'm going to just take a second and straighten these up, flatten them down. I can feel between my thumbs here when I have this fabric sandwiched together just right. And then I'm going to take that pin and pin that down. I'm going to do the same thing on these next 2 joints and take it to the machine. Okay, we have that stitched together on the top and the bottom. Pull those pins out, and we're going to press, and this time we're going to press our seams away from the center. And I know that is so confusing, so look back at your instructions. We went ahead and put the pressing direction on every step where we thought that it would help to really alleviate the bulk. It's not really that bulky of a block, but it does sit nice when you do it that way. So again, this time I'm going to take my seam allowances out away from it, and that's going to match up just perfectly with those long side strips that we made. And again, I like to kind of nudge these sides down a little bit from the back, not ironing back and forth, but simply helping them go to one side. And then I'm going to turn it over and flatten it out nicely. I'm going to do this going top to bottom here so that you can see really well. Laying that iron on there. And like I said earlier, neat little trick is that you can then place your acrylic ruler on top of that heat, and it's going to help flatten that down while I come down here and do the same thing on that bottom seam line. Right, all we have left to do is put our long skinny side strips on, and I'm going to go ahead and pin every joint, which I know that's a lot of pinning, but I really did like the way it turned out. Once you have those side strips on, your block is complete. Again, I was so intimidated. I looked at this and I thought, wow, I'm not sure exactly what to do to put it together, but it was not difficult. We just layered the pieces on, starting with the center block, working with our half square triangles, adding our little corner blocks, making our special corner units, and then adding our trim. It is a beautiful block. I can't wait to see yours all put together. Reach out to us, email, or the Facebook group, wherever you find us. Reach out, let us see your blocks, let us know if you have any questions, and thank you for spending your time with us. See you next month.